Right on. Recovered alcoholic. My name's Tony. I'm a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. Qualify for a lot of fellowships, but I found the answer that was necessary to create the change I was always looking for. My sobriety date's April 8, 1989. My first meeting was in 1978 through an intervention of people around me who thought I had a problem. I thought they lacked a sense of humor. You know, anybody around you thought you had a problem before you thought you had a problem? I had a lot of people like that. I had a lot of people always interested in my story, right? Right from junior kindergarten was assigned my first therapist. So, I've always had the human condition, right? But I've never had a viable solution for that. Where I grew up in Toronto. And that's a long story, heritage and where I come from and my dad's story and my mom's story and the influence it had on my life and my belief system and how I looked at the world and how I kind of viewed things was passed on from the people who raised me, right? And as I kind of went through life, pardon? Sorry. Yeah, get right in there. So the people who raised me, I got a lot of my outlook from them. Right? And you hear a lot of people say, oh, I was an alcoholic before I drank. I wasn't an alcoholic before I drank. I had to drink to find out I was an alcoholic. Right? It's one of those things where alcohol actually doesn't cause alcoholism. It reveals it. Right? Because I have a lot of brothers and sisters who grow up in the same environment, and they have a lot of emotional problems. They have a lot of psychiatric needs and stuff like that. But they drink normally. Like they could have one or two drinks and leave it alone. It's not from the first time I had a drink that caused my problem. It's the first time I experienced a change when I took a drink. Right? And that change was where my alcoholism started was when I started becoming more concerned with the next drink than the drink I was finishing. That's when it started. Something started to happen within inside of me that I didn't understand at the time. And I wouldn't say there was a magic happening and there was nothing really severe, but I liked the effect it produced. But the first time I actually felt the magic in a drink, where it created a psychic change. Anybody ever have a psychic change as the result of drinking? I remember I got out of a controlled environment. I was probably about 15. There's some older kids harassing me and they were bugging me and my girlfriend, and I remember the fear and the anxiety I was having. And I remember we were doing restaurant taverns at the time. There's a big whole story around that. So I remember going to my friend's place where I dropped some liquor off, and I remember sucking back a big glass of vodka. And as that first glass went down, I felt the change coming over me. The promises started to come true. Right? Yeah, anybody ever hear the promises? I suddenly realized how to handle situations that used to baffle me, right? My arms grew, I got taller, I became more tougher, and the fear that I was having went away. And I remember going to those two guys, and I took care of the situation that I was incapable of taking care of before the introduction of that liquid, right? It created something in me that I couldn't create within myself, and that's important. Right? Because then when I started having other problems, I remembered the elusive feeling I got from drinking. So, when that girl looked at me and I didn't know how to handle that situation, I took a drink and I knew how to handle the situation. It enabled me to do all the things that I was incapable of doing sober. Is that because I was an alcoholic? No, because I didn't have a solution for the human condition. And what I started to treat my human condition with was alcohol. And then I couldn't drink the amounts like I wanted to because I kept on passing out too early and I missed the party. So I got introduced to other things that helped me drink more, which is crazy. I drink to get drunk and I got too drunk, so I need to drink use something else to get me this, to get me that. Am I in the right crowd? A lot of people use motivational speakers. I use most motivational powder, right? It's kind of like, whoa. Yeah. Some people look in the mirror to talk. I used to look down on the mirror. Okay, that's the pep talk I needed. we're ready to go, right? And it was funny. What a great weekend. What a great event. I love it. I come from Vancouver, Canada. We drive down, and what a beautiful country. Beautiful people. I was telling Big Man that's probably one of my favorite events that I've been to. I've been to a lot of events. I speak a lot of places and do a lot of workshops. And this is probably the most heartfelt event that I've been to. I've been to a couple of meetings here, and I've sat and listened, and I get the identification with all the different things that are happening and the struggles that we face and the hopes that we hope to obtain and the inability to get there, right? And how short-lived hope is sometimes, right? And without a connection of something to cultivate that, it's short-lived, because then self takes over, right? The thinker takes over. This person that I come to rely on starts turning against me. And the first meeting I went to, I felt that feeling of hope here, that there was something here. And I started to recreate my life. I started to do these things. I was staying sober. I was going to meetings. Next thing I knew, I was drinking. And I didn't know how that happened and why that happened. And I had an excuse to why that happened. And then events, so long story short, I have 11 years of in and out of the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I have a horrific enough story that all those events that got me back here, you know, those moments that one day it's unacceptable, you have that moment of clarity, you can't believe where you ended up, you can't believe what you're doing, you can't believe what you've done, and that overwhelming shame, guilt, remorse, where somebody feels like they're having a tug of war in your soul. And who am I going to talk to about that? How am I going to identify? And I can't muster the strength to bring about the anger, which was talked about yesterday. Lyle did a great job, right? Like, been great speakers and great event. And so I identify with this. It's a lot easier to stay angry at the world than to be vulnerable with it. This vulnerability is a price that I couldn't afford to pay where I came from. Right? I was always on guard, always alert, and I always knew who was who in the zoo. And I learned from a young age that everything had a value to it. You had a value to it. You either were an asset or a liability. You could either help me or not help me. And so everything was commodity. It makes sound kind of weird. Like, the reason I took that job was for money. The reason we became friends was your connection. The reason we had a relationship, because I could get something from it. We'll get into that after in the fourth step. Oh, some of you identifying, right? I remember I was in this relationship once. She moved in the second date. It was great. And so I remember I was with her 3 months, and I go, by the way, what's your last name? And she wasn't my cousin, so that was good. So anyways, I have 11 years of trying to create a change that I couldn't create. And I didn't know that, because I didn't know really what the problem was. And I'd listen in meetings, I'd listen to people in the treatment community, which is fantastic here. You guys have a great facility happening here and the recovery and stuff like that. And that's like a landing place to kind of find which way I need to go. I've been in treatment a couple times. I've done my last relapse. I did 360 meetings in 90 days. And I was in 4, 12, and 12 studies after 11 years. I just turned 27, and I'm puking green bile. And I'm dying of alcoholism in AA. I knew all the slang words. I knew all the catchphrases. I knew the bumper sticker, throw a slogan at it. Acceptance is the answer to all my problems, but that means I have a lot of problems, right? You got to listen to what you're saying. Acceptance means I'm ignoring everything as usual, and I don't know how to deal with it, so we'll put it in a drawer. My way of dealing with things is ignore it, put it in a drawer. If you leave it alone long enough, it'll go away, unless it's a warrant, right? So when I got sober, things got worse. I don't know, anybody ever try that here? Anybody? Because what you're left with is you. Right? And I never was very friendly with me. And the world around me was never very friendly with me. My dialogue and self-talk and self-imagery was not very good. So if I didn't like myself, there's not much of a chance I liked you. And it wasn't a matter of time before that irritable, restless, and discontentment would start showing up in meeting people, places, and things with my reaction, my input, and my attitude. Nobody had any attitude here, attitude? It'd show up on my face. I didn't have to tell you what I was saying. It'd show up on my face. Anybody? You know the look from those people? Oh, you're here again. Good to see you. Who told you the event was this weekend? So I remember getting my 3-month chip, and the delusion was that I've created this change. And when they asked me to share, and I had this 3-month chip after 11 years of in and out, I couldn't see the 11 years and my inability to formulate the life that I always hoped for, because this time it was different. Anybody got this time it's different? Yes, it is different, but not much different. That's why we hand out chips. We don't hand out plaques, right? The chip is a reminder. The odds of you getting another one are not in your favor. Oh, no. I like the Academy Award chip. I like to thank me, and I like to thank me, and well, look how great I'm doing. And, oh, you're just coming back, aren't you? Yeah, but I mean it this time, right? Can I share? No. We know your story, right? And that's kind of it. So I shared this unbelievable story. I thought it was fantastic, personally. One of the best talks I ever gave for a guy that can't stay sober. And an hour later, I relapsed. And just baffled. So some guys got a hold. So I came back to the fellowship with this hope and the idea that maybe there was something here. But I also was under the impression now that whatever was happening here wouldn't work for a guy like me, that I was beyond human aid. I was going to be one of those guys who died. So I just turned 27. I come back, I got a 24-hour chip in my pocket, April 8th. And I remember sitting there thinking, I'll just prolong the inevitable. I'm living in meetings, like I'm doing 4 or 5 meetings a day. Because if I'm not in a meeting, I'm in a shooting gallery, or I'm somewhere, or I'm in jail or hospital, or I'm on my way to one of those facilities. Why? Because my mindset, I couldn't change my mindset. I couldn't change what was happening inside of me. Oh, I could put on a suit and show up for church. I could show up at a family event and talk about how great I'm doing with the money and the job and all that other stuff. But my alone time with me was not a very good place to be. I'd have to always have distractions to keep me from the reality of what was happening inside of me and the noise. Anybody ever see The Green Mile? It says the glass. And I understood that scene. Like I understood what he was talking about, the pain. I'm tired, boss. He's talking about the fight, right? And I realized my fight was no longer with the world. My fight was with me and my inability to find. There was a conflict with the life that I wanted to live and the life that I was living. And the reason I couldn't live the life that I wanted to live is because there was addiction still determining my existence. So I always thought I had it, and then I found out it had me. And that's what placed me beyond human aid. That's why I kept on relapsing, because I'm not dealing with a condition I can see. Because if I can see it, then I'm not beyond human aid. Then I can rely on me to watch for it. Watch. What am I watching for? Right? And then I'd be the baffled one with drink in hand. How did this happen again? Maybe one or two you like you that here? How did I get here again? This is what I didn't hope for. Right? Smashing the kid's piggy bank. Whatever. You know the story, right? And so I didn't realize my conflict was within me, and I couldn't create the change internally that I needed to find a peace that these people before me were exhibiting. So when these guys got a hold of me, they started taking me through the Big Book. This may sound weird, but the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous is the most referred to, most quoted, and less read book in our fellowship. I'm really walking around with it. Have you read it yet? Not yet. Don't want to get carried away. Do you have a Big Book? Oh, of course I do. Do you know where it is? No. Right? Have you read it yet? No, Acceptance. I've read it 3 times. Anything working for you? So we always like the quick fix, the quick ideas, the stuff, the bumper sticker slogans. We can impress our sponsor and new people with. I heard something really good at one meeting. I'm sharing it at the other meeting. So my sponsor started asking me, what does that mean? What do you mean, what does it mean? Well, you just said. Sounds good. You hear the other 5 people share it, you must know what it means. What's the depth and weight behind it? If you're putting your life on what you're saying, what is it that you're saying? Wow, that was kind of wild. So he started taking me through the book. He started introducing me to an idea that this illness was something beyond my ability to control. And relapse is the confirmation of step 1. That this condition could keep happening regardless of my efforts on my own part. I could do all the meetings in the world, I could do all the treatment, I could do all these other things. Unless something internally changed, I was going to continue to experience the step 1 promise. That I'll be without defense against the next drink. I'll end up in the very place that I'm trying to get away from. Why? Because of my mindset, my map, my GPS is not working right. But I'm the only one that don't know it. Oh, everybody around me knows my GPS ain't working right. But I'm the only one that don't get it. This time it's different. Did you reprogram it? No, I just put it in a different outlet. I'm going to a different meeting. That's like sitting in an emergency thinking, it's all good. Have you seen a doctor yet? No, I don't need to. I've talked to 3 people here. I know what the problem is now. Right? And that's what we do at meetings. I don't need to do the book. That guy just told me what the solution is. We heard that yesterday, right? Getting people's advice. So these guys started taking me through the book, and I had the step 1 experience. And then made step 2, the idea being presented the same way it was for Bill, that there was a course of action that I could take that create this change that I always looked for. But my problem wasn't me, which may sound kind of weird because I was exactly the way I was trained to be, based on the condition that I was raised in. It wouldn't create anything different than what was being presented. Like I have a rescue dog, a big Dobie. And when I got him, he was a mess. Like people had a shock collar around him. He could count his rib cage. He was a year old, and he would submissive pee all over the place and vomit. Like he could. Why I bonded with that dog because he grew up in an environment that he wasn't allowed to become what he was meant to be, and he was robbed of that. And so when he came into our home, I had to learn to love him differently, to meet him to where he was and start conditioning him differently. It may sound weird, but when I showed him the shock collar, he just started peeing and cowering. They had it set on 95. So we see it was the conditions that made him the way he was. He wasn't born that way. And so as we removed him from the condition, as I got removed from the life I was living, and I was put into a different environment, it was weird. It was kind of foreign to me because my thinking, my emotional state was still in this environment. But I'm trying to survive in this environment. And so as time went on, somewhere along the line, he found out he was a Doberman. And he became what he was bred and meant to be. And it took nurturing, it took love, and it took consistency. Right? And it took the power of the ability not to act on my instincts to punish him for being something that he was incapable of. I don't know if that kind of makes sense. So when he was pissing and submissing, I didn't punish him. Right? And when he was puking, I just cleaned it up and I loved him. And that's what we do here with each other. We sound kind of weird. We come in here broken. Right? We're not meant to be what we are, but the conditions in life and everything kind of brought us here. Right? And so when I came up to the 4th step, it was kind of like, oh my God, I don't want to tell nobody this. Tell nobody what. You already know everything that's on here. There's nothing new. You hear people, oh my God, the 4th step, what? What's new on there that you don't know? Were you not there the whole time? Yeah. oh, the 5th step, that's why I don't want to tell people, well, have you done the 4th yet? No, so why are you worried about the 5th? See, we talk ourselves out of happiness and content because I know. You don't know shit. Right? You know that if you keep doing what you're doing, you're always going to get what you got. The definition of insanity isn't doing the same thing over and over again. What we have is something that we can't help doing. It's an illness that we can't help doing. It's not consciously doing, I'm going to go do this to myself. It's a condition that I can't change on my own. So our fellowship talks about, of course, and it's in the heritage of all mankind, it's always been there that when we've tapped into something, the creator of this thing, the red road, that it creates a different life that we're able to live that we weren't able to live over here. by accessing this thing by the forefathers of the people that went before us, I could have the same experience they had. Where before, my dog didn't access his spirit of what may sound kind of weird, that when the UPS guy came, first seen him, my dog just towered and was pissing all over the place. And the guy just looked at him and kind of went, and 3 years later, the same guy came to the door, and he was like, that's not the same dog. The dog found his spirit, what he was meant and bred to be. I don't know, kind of weird, right? And he was like, oh my God. And that's kind of like us, right? When we find what we're meant to be and to become and get access to that, but it comes as a result of getting access to something greater than me. Back to something that's always been with me, but I didn't know it was there, and I didn't know that was my connection to the Creator. So when they talk about here in the book, it says lack of power is our dilemma, not lack of thinking, planning, scheming, coercing, manipulation. That's not we don't have no lack in that area. Lack of power to create the change that I hope for. Well, what's the hope? There was always this thing deep down inside of me that knew there was a different life for me than the one I was living. There was this thing inside of me that would talk to me. And I would look in the mirror and this thing would say, what are you doing? Anybody ever had that voice? What are you doing? It would question me what I'm doing, and I'd wait for an answer. I don't know. I was hoping you'd tell me. Right? And then you have that moment. What do you go for help? Like an intervention on something beyond our understanding, something to motivate us, that moment of clarity that motivates us to go to that meeting, to phone that person, to go to that treatment, to do something on the idea of hope that there might be something different that originated from inside. Until that inside thing cultivated, my life that I was living was acceptable. But that moment of clarity, some people call it the gift of desperate, I call it the moment of realizing that there's a different lifestyle here for me. So when they introduced me to the 4-step, it became really interesting. So I'm watching time here. Is that they talk about, on page 60, what the human condition, and being convinced any life run on self-will can hardly be a success. I can't see that. All I can see is the moment of my existence, but any minute it's going to be okay. I can't see the whole picture. I'm just kind of designed that way. All I can see is where I'm at. I can't see the whole picture. So it took me to have to do the 4-step to see why it was I was living the way I was living and why I couldn't change it on my own. And how the belief system and the values that I was hanging on to and the things that were passed down to me were actually poisoning, crippling me, and robbing me from the life that I was intended to have, or the desire of the life that I always hoped for. See, I always wanted to hold my kid. When we were talking about that, to hold my kid and tell him I love you. What I ended up doing was pushing him away because I was afraid of the father that I was more of a danger and a liability to them. Now, what kind of thinking is that? To think my family, my kid, would be better without me. That's a level of disturbance. And who are you going to talk to about that? Come to a meeting, hey, you know what? That stuff I didn't share with people. That level of self-loathing, that level of I can't believe this thing, the level of self-esteem that I couldn't even be a father to my own kid. Who are you going to share that with? That the mother of your kid and your kid would be better off without you? And then you go sit in a bar and you drink until that feeling went away, and then years later, it was not like they weren't even ever a part of your life. Right? I don't know if anybody's ever, and that seems to be all life. So we talk about, I lost all these things. No, all these things lost me. They lost me to addiction. They lost me to a life, and their prayers and their hopes is that when I ended up here, I could have a different experience. So when new people show up here, it's just not them we're dealing with. We're dealing with the prayers of the mothers, the sisters, the brothers, the kids. They're praying that whatever they sent us would come back not broken anymore. That they would find their spirit, the life that they were meant to live, and the potential of the human experience on a spiritual level that's available to us. See, I had the animal part of me because I grew up with my instincts, instinct-based. I knew ahead of time what was happening, when it was happening. I knew what you were up to. And that robbed me of so many relationships. It robbed me of so many things. I'd quit before it happened. I'd end a relationship. I'd do all these things beforehand because I knew. And it was talked about, Lyle did a great job yesterday. He talked about protecting myself by staying angry, vulnerability, because pain was not my friend. Like, I can't control pain, but I can control anger. And if you can't hurt me, if you can't get close to me, but then I'm in a place of complete loneliness all the time. Separation. I sit in a whole room full of people and I'm not connected to anybody because I'm still connected to myself. And I can't break that bondage. I can't break that separation. I can't break the prison of my own mind. I can't break the reflection I have within inside of myself reflected on you and boomerang back on me. I talk myself out of happiness. I don't know how many New Year parties, where everybody get together and they hug and kiss. I'd go sit outside in my car while everybody was hugging and kissing because I knew they didn't want to shake my hand or kiss me and say Happy New Year's. Like, that's crazy, but that was my belief system based on it. So when I got to the fourth step, they talked about here, I needed to find a new way of looking at things. If I didn't find a new way of looking at things, I'd continue to get what I've always gotten and attract what I've always done. I was like a magnet. So what they were trying to say is, if I entered the spiritual realm, I'd flip the magnet around where it wouldn't repel, it would attract. It may sound kind of weird. Energy is what I believe is all based on frequency, and we call it God, Creator. But it taps us into a universal thing that I knew that was available, but I couldn't get access to. What makes me think it's available? Because people would pray for me, and I'd end up in a meeting. How many of us of our kind end up in meetings? How many of us are sober on a Friday night? That you want to hear a miracle? Last night at the hotel, there wasn't one cop that showed up. Not one broken window. Huh? Not one relationship running after the other with a knife. You're in the wrong room. No creeping around that I know of. But when you hear stuff like that for people like us, it's pretty amazing. But no, the fire alarms didn't go off, and we're out here like there's something happening here, and that could happen on a continuous basis. So when they said about this fourth step, they said the purpose of the four was two things. One is to discover the obstacles of the things that cut me off from my Creator. This power that's available to me to create the change. What do you mean by that power? I remember times where I wanted to speak up, but I didn't speak up because I was afraid to. Anybody? And then those times where that something would rise up inside of me, and regardless, and I'd stand up. I'd get the strength to face whatever it was, and I'd stand up and I'd face whatever it was. And it is that thing deep down, and I think they call it our spirit, that gives us, that harvests the strength that we need to find in order to face life. Right? And so they said lack of power is my dilemma. And so they said the purpose of the fourth step was to remove that wasn't intended to be there. It's like with my dog. I removed all the elements that weren't intended to be there so he could become what he was meant to be. He could find the spirit of the dog he was bred to be. As weird as that may sound, I really identify with that. Because I always identified myself as was part animal, right? The way I was raised, where I come from, the way I reacted to life, my instinctual reaction to people, places, and things. It was always fear, violent based, right? My vocabulary was very limited. I remember saying to this girl once, I said, "Why are you always poking the bear?" She says, "Who wants to live with a bear?" I go, "Whoa, that was heavy." Like stuff like that. I never thought of that way, right? So perception and how we look at things. So they talk about value. How we value things is my belief system, my thinking, value, how I value things, how I see things, and how I respond to things. Right? So value may sound kind of funny, but if you come over to my place, I have a certain section my wife allows me to have that I have my stuff in. It used to be all over the house, but it's all migrated to one section in the garage. And I have these things. She looks, she says, "What's that?" And I go, and I take it, and I look at it, and I go, "Oh, this. Well, this is from here at this time, and my brother owned it, and he's no longer with. He died, and it's just a little something that if someone else seen it, they'd throw it, but it has value for me, has energy, attachment, and memories." And so in the fourth step, they said, what we need to look for is the common manifestations of the things within inside of myself had defeating me. Because what I need to do is a new way of looking at things. I need to have an inventory process spiritually based, and I'm going to look at my life now to see the things within inside of myself that are causing my failure. So they talk about resentment as the number one offender. It's the number one thing that has it manifest as it presents itself. And it shows up as anger, emotional deformities, these attachments to people, places, and things, my thinking, my outlook, my view, my attachment, right? And so they asked me to make a list of these things. And I made a list of all those attachments that I had with people, places, and things. And then when I got to the people around me, they asked me to look at these people that I still harbored resentments against, like my mom, my dad. And they said, let's visit their life for a minute. So when I sat and I looked and I visited their life, I did some investigation. Why are they the way they were? And I see my mom got outcast from the family because she was going to keep me and not put me up for adoption. My dad was dropped off at a bootlegger's place because his mom would have lost her status card if she would have kept him. Right? Wow. I can see why they're bitter. My mom's dad had a deformity in his leg, and his parents told him if he doesn't get up and work and earn his keep, he could die where he lies at 9 years old. Wow, that seems pretty harsh. And I was complaining about having no cable. Where's my phone? No, and then I heard that, and so I heard the bitterness that was passed on. And then my mom and my dad found comfort in drink. And then they passed their belief and everything on to me. And so it's wow. So when I started looking at that, you know what I started to have for my mom for the first time? Some compassion. Right? And in turn, I started having compassion for me, and I started putting those prayers that are in there, looking at them differently. Didn't mean the situation was different. It means I looked at them differently. And as I did my fifth step with that, I let one person know, not the whole world know from a podium, of all the things that happened and all the things that happened with my mom, me, my dad, and all that other stuff associated with that lifestyle. Prostitution, gangs, and drug running, and guns, all that stuff, what all that lifestyle had to do, and the effects it had on a kid growing up in that. Right? When I become accustomed to the word, all that stuff. And it was funny, when I looked at it, I said, who wouldn't end up like this in that environment? Who wouldn't have that? But what started to happen was I can no longer allow that to define my story of who I was. I started to see I was attached to my story. And if I didn't have my story, then who am I? And that's a scary thing to do, because my story is my story, why I am. You'd be this way too. And every time I got a chance, I'd tell you my story. What I was saying is, this is the way I am because of this. And my sponsor says, no, you're this way because you don't want to change. Well, right? And I couldn't change because I didn't have access to this power. So as I went through the resentments and I did that stuff, and then the fears were really interesting. When I did the fear column, I seen 98% of my fears were because I was self-reliant, that I wasn't connected to source, to something greater than me. And if I was connected to this life force, would I still have these fears and concerns? And I realized no. And so what I started to realize in the fourth step was I started to have a relationship with this idea in step 2 and presented in step 3 that it was possible. So step 4 allowed me to start having this experience of the removal of the bondage, the pain, and the suffering, and the agony of the attachment of my story. And what it allowed me to do is to start becoming an observer, which is a lot different than a participant. And as I became an observer, I started to see these things that were poisoning me and how they were poisoning my relationships, and it was robbing me and my kids of how I was passing that on. The very thing that I loathed that I was becoming, and I couldn't change or do. So as I started to apply the prayers in step 4 and the ideas of the shift of looking at things differently, I started to have a different experience. And when I did the 5th step, it was really remarkable that I went through my 5th step 100 miles an hour. Because the purpose of the fifth step wasn't to find out the child within or this or that. It was an act of humility to share with the last identifying person was another human being. Right? The ego deflation of sharing things that I would never share with nobody. So the one guy I did my fifth with, I did 75% with him. And 25% I did with my brother, because there's statute of limitations and there's certain things that you just can't tell anybody based on the lifestyle I come from, and I'm not going to get into that. Right? But I know that will go to the grave with him. I just need to tell one person that. So what I've done in step 5 is I've admitted to myself, and 4 to God, because I've invited him in to create a shift, right? Because I couldn't face myself before. All the other times I tried it before, I'd get loaded. I'd look at me and the pain would just overwhelm me. It would consume me. It'd open a black box that I couldn't get out of, and it would take another relapse to shift out of that. When I brought this idea, this creator in, and I asked with the third step prayer, and I asked for guidance before I started, something started to happen that I can't explain. This phenomena started to happen. I started to have the strength to face me for the first time in the light of the experience of Alcoholics Anonymous. So what started to happen for me was I wasn't getting my story anymore. What I was getting was the story of Alcoholics Anonymous and those who went before me. Right? When I looked at that poster, and you got the 3 chiefs on there, the 3 warriors on there, they have a story, what's available to those who have yet have that experience. And the fear that you'd have on this side of it, and their guidance would allow you to go through things that you would never go through on your own. And that's what we do in the fellowship of NA, AA, and treatment, is you bring whatever you brought here broken, and what we do is remove the stuff that no longer, we remove the stuff that isn't you or your story, and you start becoming what you're meant to become, right? And to be an influence in somebody else's life in a positive way, what we heard earlier, what a gift. The same people you move product with is the people you're now helping. Huh? That's not a mind spin. Hey, you got any stuff? Yeah, I got a big book. Whoa, easy, easy. Let's not get carried away, right? It's amazing. We'll do anything anybody gives us but the big book. Whoa, wait a minute. You sure this stuff won't kill you? No, okay. You want to do the work? So the other part was this was really interesting. This is the sex inventory. Woo! No, it wasn't as happy as I thought it would be. I thought, oh yeah, I got lots to write about, right? It was like, oh my God, my spouse says, no. I'm not making a porn movie. So he says, write down the stuff that causes you guilt, shame, and remorse, and embarrassment. That was my first list. You know, like, I mean, where I grew up, like, how we got taught about sex education was, here's a reel-to-reel. That's back then. That's what pornography used to come from, on reel-to-reel. Nothing worse than the tape burning out, but that's another story. So you're 8 and 9 years old watching pornography as a sex education thing. So, you know, it makes hell for the first date. You come out with a tool belt on, playing some music with the lights adjusted, right? So it didn't go over well, right? So anyways, so to warp ideas in there also, but I didn't know that because the people I was hanging with was all instinct-based also. So this is really interesting. It took me probably 16 years, no, I would say 12 years of sobriety before I started having a relationship with another person. A relationship with a person. Before that, it was always a 3-way. Because the first relationship I had was with me. And the second relationship, most of the relationship I had was with my... I discovered it around 6 and I haven't let go of it. Like, whoa! And I thought everybody else should be impressed with it too, right? So it was, this may sound weird, but it took an inventory to see you weren't having a relationship with me. We were both having a relationship with my, I'm going to say it, penis. Oh my God. And so like, I didn't care about you. If we're not having sex, we're not having a relationship. I didn't know how. My everything was based on money. No money? Okay, rent's time to go. We're not having sex? No, that means you don't love me anymore. That means you're having it somewhere else. I don't know about not feeling good. Who's not feeling good? Out of here. You're over. Am I alone? A couple people, I can't believe you're saying it out loud. Whoa. So I can't believe it either. So when I looked at the inventory thing, I kind of went, damn, no wonder I'm not having relationships. My first sexual experience was brutal, and it was alone. No, so it was... So, I mean, my first actual involving another human being, I was drunk. I'd go from, hi, how are you, to wow, is this your clothes or mine? Like, I didn't know how to have relationships. Like, I didn't know how to formulate that. It was always instinct-based, sex-based. Protector, I was always a protector. I was always the guy, you hear it all the time. What are you complaining about? You got food in the fridge? You got a roof over your head? What are you crying about? Right? You're ungrateful, right? And I see my mom traded that commodity for security and safety. And she would find the toughest guy in the neighborhood to look after her so she wouldn't be victim to the other people in the neighborhood. And I watched this as a kid. So all my relationships became based on that. And so what happens is, how can I form a true relationship? I had warped ideas. So when I did a sane and sound idea, which is part of the 4-step inventory, I didn't see it till I was 16 years sober. And why I seen it was I was in so much pain by what I was attracting still, because I was still attracting a warped sense of protection. Wounded bird syndrome, right? I'll become your protector, your provider, and that's how relationships don't survive very long when they're instinct-based. And pain soon follows, because it's not based on substance. It's not based on two people connecting on a level that happens inside, right? And so I remember I did that inventory because I remember I didn't want my daughters to have this kind of relationship I was having with the people I was having it with. I don't know if that kind of makes sense. I wanted different for my kids than was passed on to me in my belief system. So I rewrote it out, and for the first time, I brought God into it, or the Creator, into asking for guidance in this area. And it may sound kind of weird, but either it was said earlier, either God is everything or He's nothing. So my limitation that I place on God has always been my experience. But if I take away the limitations, then the experience is going to be endless. Lyle was talking about that. Where we fail to produce, God starts to show up. I'm always type of, I don't know how God's going to do this. I've been thinking about it all week. I don't know how you're going to do it. But yet, we see the miracle, or we see God's fingerprints all over things that we don't recognize at first. And as we get more sober, we see that there's been something available here. And so when I did all that in the fifth, and then I wrote the sane and sound idea, what I wanted my partner to be, and what I wanted my relationships to look like, there was a shift in who I became, because I have to become these things in order to attract these things. And I remember I no longer want to drive through relationships, because all my relationships were like fast food. Stop, coupons don't work over here, time to go over there, right? And then it's my story, sorry, I probably can't believe it, you're saying it out loud, right? So there was no real substance, and there was always loneliness in it, right? And so when I brought God into that area of my life, it was shortly afterwards. I remember I was driving on my bike, and I was refraining. It talks about when to yield would mean heartache. So I'm asking God for the strength and direction I need not to fall into the temptations that cause me pain, agony, guilt, shame, and remorse. That I no longer wanted to live on an instinct-based living. I wanted to live on a spiritual realm and attract somebody of the same nature, right? And so what happens that as I was doing these prayers, I remember bringing God. I remember I was riding my bike, and I'm roaring down a beautiful night, and I said, okay, God, I said, I seen what you did with the rest of my life. I said, well, why don't you show me what you could do with this area? That's a powerful prayer. You can try it. But hang on to your ass, right? I said, okay, let's see what you can do. I got a tough guy, got tears running down my eyes. I said, if this is your will for me, these relationships, could you make the next one a lot less painful because I can't take it? But it was me that was putting out the bulletin board, attracting all this stuff, right? So I remember bringing God into it, and it was kind of like, and I did the 5th step around it, because one of the principle of the 5th step is the continuing of the telling on myself, the writing myself out, not allowing spiritual pride to take over where I'm exempt from the human experience. The continuous cleansing of the things that attach to my spirit that rob me of the human condition that I was meant to live. These things that become stumbling blocks of shame, guilt, and remorse, right? I'm not exempt from the human experience, but I could create a different experience by following a different path. So what happened is, which is really interesting, I did this prayer and I said, let's see what you can do at 16 years sober. So events, how God works, I believe, is through people, places, and things. How many people has read Bill's story here? Or hear somebody talk about it? So when Bill was in treatment, for the second time, he had a moment with his Creator. He made a complete defeat. And in that moment, I believe he sent something to the universe where God got that memo. And what he did was sent it to one of his workers. And one of his workers went and visited Bill, right? And carried this message to Bill, which is now Alcoholics Anonymous 88 years later, right? And the Dr. Silkworth witnessed this miracle happening in his facility. It's something at work here. Even the doctor said, even though you may remain to scoff, we hope you remain to pray. Right? Nothing wrong with challenging God. Try it. Okay, everybody says, I remember the earliest writers, everybody says you're all that in a bag of chips. Show me. Show me. Right? And 34 years later, I'm blown away. So I did this prayer. Half an hour later, I'm sitting at Starbucks waiting for my buddy to show up in his big car. This lady gets out of the car, and she's just glowing. I just looked at her and I went, wow. She's wearing track pants, no makeup, I went, wow. So she went by, and I remember going, hey, what's the matter? You don't say hello anymore? Like, I act like I know her, right? And she goes, oh, yeah. So she went into the video store, and she goes, I want to see if this guy's a player, because she's seen the bikes and stuff there, so I want to see if this guy's a player or not, right? So based on my inventory and based on everything I've done and the spiritual path I was living, when she came back out, she says, oh, I can't stay long. I got somebody at home. I said, lucky guy, and I backed up. She says, no, it's my mom. I'm watching videos with her tonight. She's not feeling well. It was Saturday night. She was spending time with her mom. I said, well, in that case, I said, here's a Starbucks coupon good at any Starbucks in my presence, right? And I'm thinking AA relationship. So I gave her the card. I'm phoning U-Haul. No, so I'm thinking, okay, she's going to phone tonight. 2 weeks later. What? 2 weeks. Then when we got together, we did it like a job interview, because relationships are like a job interview. They really are. There's 3 months probationary period. You kind of put on the table what the benefits are, what they're not, what industry you're in. So the first meeting, we seen that we were on both spiritual plane, had the same ideas and moving in the same direction. Right? And then, so since then, we've dated, we've went through all the stuff necessary to remove all the stuff that would get in the way of our union together. Right? And that would be the engagement. So we went through the attraction, which would be step 2, the engagement, which is also step 2, and the idea of the marriage in step 3, the idea of this relationship, and step 4 was the removal of all the things, all the X's in my phone, all the stuff that the self-entertainment section, all the I know most of you was the first thing we do after sex, clear history. No, sorry. No, I can't believe I said that either. Okay, 4th step. Oh boy, so that's part of the 5th step. That's what you would share with adults. Just joking. So what happened is with my wife, as being a normie, I would bring, so I never told her I was out. So we dated for a while, and I remember she said, relationships aren't your strong suit, eh? What makes you say that? She says, the way you conduct yourself. She says, it's either you're all in or get out. She says, well, how is that the conductor? I didn't know any other way to do it. Are you not happy? Let me go get you some boxes. What's there to talk about? I wasn't looking for anybody when I found you. She says, that's not a way to... I'm wondering why my relationships aren't working. So I remember, this is funny. So she comes home, she comes over, visits. She says, if I'm not worth marrying, I'm not worth moving in. I thought, this is weird. So Roman Catholic, strong spiritual beliefs, and she's still living at home. Master's degree, like she's not beyond my pay grade. So she shows up and she has this binder with all these tabs in it. She says, I was going through the internet and I found all these different areas that you seem to be conflicted with. And this will help you negotiate through that, like how to sit and have a conversation without being a hostage or throwing out the ultimatum of ending it. Like how to talk to another human being about emotions. Oh my God. She says, I got 16 points here. I said, have you lost your mind? I remember saying that. I said, what planet are you from? I got up and laughed. I said, you're and she's looking at me like, I'm going, you're nuts, right? So I'm happy to report we've been married 14 years. And pretty well. And we've successfully finished 15 of the 16 points. And that's like this whole thing, right? It is, how do I get from here to there? How do I take direction from somebody else? And how do I tap into this power that gives me the strength not to rob myself of what's available to me? Right? Because what's available here is not your story anymore. If you want what we have, our story, what's available here, and are willing to go to any lengths to get it, then you're ready to take certain steps. And those steps will lead you to the promises. Well, next time you hear the promises, listen to what it's saying. A new freedom and a new happiness. You will not regret the past nor wish to shut the door on it. You'll see how your experience can benefit others. From where I come from and what I'm doing and the things that have happened is remarkable how God uses me on an instrument on a daily. For me to be in North Dakota with you beautiful people is beyond anything. I got eye surgery. I thought you guys were good looking last year. This year, you guys are just fantastic. But may you find the God that's available here, or the Spirit that's always been with you. May you find the strength that will enable you to live the life that you always hoped for. And I pray you no longer rob yourself of what's available here and come walk with us. Thank you for having me.